When Richard Smallwood took his final breath at 12:36 a.m., the music world didn't just lose a singer. They lost the man whose songs made Whitney Houston cry in the recording booth, the composer Destiny's Child called to ask permission from, and the genius who wrote one song during his darkest moment that would end up being performed at a school tragedy that shook America. This isn't just another celebrity passing. This is about how one man's pain became millions of people's strength and what the music industry is hiding about his final years. Richard Smallwood passed away from complications of kidney failure at Brook Grove Rehabilitation and Nursing Center in Maryland. But here's what nobody's talking about. The man who could have retired decades ago, who had presidents calling him, who had every major label fighting over him, spent his last moments in a nursing facility battling health issues that kept him from doing the one thing he lived for, creating music. And the reason why he couldn't record in his final years? That's where this story gets really heavy. While the official statements mention his passing, there's a deeper truth about what Richard Smallwood endured that most outlets won't touch. But we're going there. Let's rewind to understand who this man really was, because Richard Smallwood wasn't your typical gospel singer. Born in November 1948 in Atlanta and raised in Washington, D.C., he started playing piano at age 5. But here's the twist. He wasn't reading music. He was playing by ear, which means this 5-year-old kid was basically a musical genius that nobody recognized yet. By 11 years old, while most kids were worried about homework and video games, Smallwood had already formed his first gospel group. Think about that for a second. 11 years old and already leading musicians. But that's not even the most impressive part of his early life. The man studied at Howard University alongside legends you definitely know. Donny Hathaway, the soul music icon, was his classmate. His teacher in 8th grade, Roberta Flack. Yes, that Roberta Flack. Imagine being taught by someone who would become one of the most celebrated voices in music history. But Smallwood wasn't just soaking up R&B and soul influences. He became obsessed with Johann Sebastian Bach, calling him his absolute favorite composer, and this is where his unique sound started forming. While other gospel artists were sticking to traditional church music, Smallwood was merging Baroque classical techniques with contemporary gospel, creating something the industry had never heard before. Here's where it gets interesting. He formed the Richard Smallwood Singers in 1977 and didn't sign his first record deal until 1982. That's 5 years of grinding, performing, building a following without any major label support. When that debut album finally dropped, the industry wasn't ready for what happened next. The album spent 87 weeks on Billboard's spiritual album sales chart. That's not a typo. 87 weeks. Most albums today are lucky to chart for 87 days. This was a gospel album dominating the charts for nearly 2 years straight, and nobody in the mainstream was paying attention yet. But the people who knew, they knew. The Richard Smallwood Singers weren't just another church choir. They brought a progressive, contemporary sound that appealed to young, educated, mostly black Christian adults, which was revolutionary because gospel music at that time was mainly attracting older audiences. Smallwood changed that. His group became the cool gospel act, the one college students and young professionals actually wanted to listen to. And the vocalists in his group, they weren't playing around. Lead vocals rotated between powerhouse singers whose voices could literally shake a room, creating this distinct sound that made them instantly recognizable.
But here's what most people don't know about Smallwood's journey through the music industry, and this part reveals a lot about how the business really works. He bounced between every major gospel label that existed, comparing their support and how things were done. That's not the story of a struggling artist. That's the story of someone so valuable that labels kept competing for him. But it's also the story of an artist who saw firsthand how these companies operated, who supported their artists and who didn't. Eventually, he landed at what's now RCA Inspiration, and that's when he made a major change. Smallwood disbanded the Richard Smallwood Singers and formed something bigger, Vision. This wasn't just a rebranding move. This was about creating a massive choir that could handle the increasingly complex arrangements he was writing. And this is when the song that would define his entire legacy was born. But the story behind that song is absolutely heartbreaking, and it explains why it resonates so deeply with people going through their darkest moments. Total Praise was written in 1996 while Smallwood's mother was ill and his godbrother was terminally ill with brain cancer. Picture this scene. You're watching two people you love deeply slowly dying, and you're completely helpless to stop it. Most people would fall apart. Smallwood wrote a song instead. But not just any song. He wrote what would become one of the most performed gospel songs in modern history. He described feeling helpless as a caregiver, and God gave him that song in the middle of all that pain. The song gave him peace during the worst time of his life. But here's what he admitted that shook everyone. He had no idea it would have the impact it did. None. He thought he was just processing his grief through music.
That song traveled places Smallwood never imagined. Destiny's Child covered it as part of their 2007 a cappella gospel medley. Stevie Wonder performed it. It became a staple in churches everywhere. But the most powerful moment came after an unthinkable tragedy. After the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting, the family of one of the victims specifically requested Total Praise be performed at her funeral. When you understand that a family choosing music for their child's funeral picked Smallwood's song, the one he wrote while watching his loved ones suffer, you realize the depth of connection his music created. That's not just a song anymore. That's a lifeline for people drowning in grief. The other song that cemented his legend status, I Love the Lord. And the story of how that song reached millions proves Smallwood's influence stretched way beyond the gospel world. Whitney Houston remade it for the Preacher's Wife soundtrack in 1996, and when Whitney Houston chooses your song, that's not just a cover, that's a coronation. Houston's version introduced Smallwood's music to people who never stepped foot in a church, people who didn't listen to gospel radio, people who had no idea who Richard Smallwood was. Suddenly, this church song was playing in cars, at weddings, at events everywhere. Boyz II Men even closed their 1997 album Evolution with Dear God, which included a refrain from it. But here's what separates Smallwood from other gospel artists who had crossover success. He performed for 3 presidents, Nixon, Reagan, and Clinton. Think about the political spectrum there. Republican presidents, a Democratic president, different eras, different policies, but they all wanted Richard Smallwood performing for them. His music transcended politics, transcended denominations, transcended everything that usually divides people. And here's something that's almost hard to believe. The Richard Smallwood Singers became the first gospel group to tour the Soviet Union in the late 1980s. During the Cold War era, when tensions between America and the Soviet Union were still intense, Smallwood's music was building bridges.
The accolades kept piling up throughout his career. 8 Grammy nominations, multiple Dove and Stellar Awards. He was inducted into the Gospel Music Hall of Fame in 2006. But there's something fascinating about how people in the music industry talked about him. A gospel radio host once said that no matter what genre Smallwood played, the piano was always the prominent feature in his music, and that's because of his classical training. While other artists were focused on vocals, Smallwood made the piano tell stories. His arrangements were intricate, complex, showing off that Bach influence he loved so much. There's also this aspect of Smallwood's songwriting that a musicologist pointed out, and it's brilliant. In gospel music, with its focus on celebration and praise, there can be emotional narrowness in what people sing about. But Smallwood's pen had room for pain, hurt, sorrow, anguish, and melancholy. That's revolutionary. He didn't pretend life was always good. He didn't write songs that only worked when you were feeling victorious. His music met people where they were, in their mess, in their struggles, and said, it's okay to not be okay. That's why his songs connected so powerfully.
Now here's where the story takes a turn that should make everyone pay attention to how we treat our legends while they're still alive. In his final years, Smallwood battled mild dementia and other health issues that prevented him from recording new music. This man who gave us decades of timeless music, who influenced generations of artists, who wrote songs that comforted people during their worst moments, was silenced by health problems that slowly took away his ability to create. And while he was going through this, dealing with these challenges, where was the massive industry support? Where were the tributes and celebrations while he could still enjoy them?
In December 2023, Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser designated December 1 as Richard Smallwood Day, honoring his 75th birthday and contributions to the city. That's beautiful, but think about the timing. By then, he was already dealing with significant health challenges. The recognition came, but it came late. Too late for him to fully appreciate what his legacy meant to so many people. And that pattern repeats constantly in the music industry. We wait until artists are gone or nearly gone before we properly honor them. In 2019, Smallwood released his autobiography, Total Praise, where he spoke openly about his personal journey through seasons of grief and depression. That book revealed a side of him the public rarely saw. The man behind the uplifting songs struggled deeply with mental health, with loss, with the weight of carrying other people's pain through his music. He was transparent about his battles, about the darkness he faced, and that honesty made him even more relatable. But it also showed that creating beauty doesn't mean you're not hurting. Smallwood made songs that healed others, while he himself needed healing. His final recordings with Vision produced hits that proved he still had that magic touch, even as his health declined. Songs like Angels and his continued performances of Total Praise showed an artist who refused to stop creating as long as he physically could. But he had been with every major gospel label, experiencing different levels of support, and that experience taught him how the industry really worked. The business side, the promotional side, the way labels treated their artists when they were hot versus when they weren't generating massive revenue anymore.
When you look at Smallwood's influence on music, it's staggering. His compositions weren't just gospel songs. They became part of American musical culture. Center of My Joy, co-written with Bill and Gloria Gaither, became a wedding staple. Total Praise became a funeral standard. I Love the Lord became a worship anthem. These songs outlived trends, outlived genre boundaries, outlived everything except the human need for music that speaks to the soul. And they did all that while maintaining their gospel roots, never compromising what made them special in the first place. The contemporary gospel artists today, whether they realize it or not, are standing on foundations Smallwood built. That blend of classical training with gospel fervor, that willingness to tackle difficult emotions in church music, that progressive contemporary sound that appeals to younger, educated audiences. Smallwood pioneered all of it. He held a master's degree in divinity from Howard University, completed in 2004, which shows he was equally committed to understanding faith intellectually as he was to expressing it musically. That combination of deep theological knowledge and exceptional musical talent created something truly unique. What's happening now in the gospel community is an outpouring of love and tributes from artists who were directly influenced by Smallwood. Social media is filled with musicians sharing stories about how his music shaped their careers, how his songs got them through impossible situations, how meeting him changed their perspective on what gospel music could be. One artist posted about being absent from the body, meaning present with the Lord, praying for his family and vision. Another talked about how the great will be missed, but the legacy remains. These aren't just polite industry statements. These are genuine expressions of grief from people who lost a mentor, an inspiration, a legend.
But let's talk about what this loss really means for gospel music moving forward. Smallwood represented a bridge between traditional and contemporary, between classical and modern, between church music and mainstream appeal.
His smooth, assured voice and piano abilities, steeped in classical training, created a standard that's going to be incredibly difficult to match. The artists coming up now have to figure out how to honor that legacy while finding their own voices. And that's not an easy task when you're following someone who literally changed the genre. There's also the question of how the industry will remember him. Will they truly celebrate his contributions, or will this be another case where a legend passes and after a few weeks of tributes, everyone moves on to the next trend? The streaming numbers for his songs are probably spiking right now, which is great for his estate, but also feels a bit hollow when you think about how he spent his final years unable to create new music, dealing with health problems that slowly diminished his abilities. The industry takes what it needs from artists and doesn't always give back proportionally. Richard Smallwood's family released a statement asking for privacy while celebrating the legacy he left behind. They talked about him unselfishly sharing his gifts with the world, and that word, unselfishly, is perfect, because that's exactly what he did. He wrote total praise during personal agony and gave it to everyone who needed it. He wrote, "I love the Lord," and let Whitney Houston make it her own. He wrote "Center of My Joy" and watched it become part of countless celebrations. He didn't hoard his talent. He poured it out, generously, consistently, for decades. The timing of his passing, early in the morning at a rehabilitation center, far from recording studios and concert halls, reminds us that even legends face the same human vulnerabilities we all do. Kidney failure complications ultimately took him after years of declining health that robbed him of his ability to record. That's the part that should haunt the music industry. One of the greatest gospel composers and performers of modern times spent his final years unable to share his gifts because his body wouldn't cooperate. And while that's just the cruel reality of aging and illness, it feels particularly tragic for someone whose entire life was about creating beauty through music. What Richard Smallwood leaves behind isn't just a catalog of songs, it's a blueprint for how to create music that transcends its genre, how to write from pain and produce healing, how to honor tradition while pushing boundaries, and how to influence mainstream culture while staying rooted in faith. His music will continue playing in churches, at weddings, at funerals, in moments of joy and moments of grief. Total praise will still build to that triumphant amen that gives people chills. I love the Lord will still move people to tears. And future generations will discover his music and wonder why they're just now hearing about this incredible artist. That's the legacy. Not just the songs themselves, but the way those songs become part of people's most important life moments, providing comfort and strength exactly when it's needed most. Richard Smallwood understood that music wasn't just entertainment, it was ministry, it was healing. It was a gift that kept giving long after the last note faded. And now that gift becomes eternal, preserved in recordings that will outlive all of us, reminding future generations that true artistry comes from vulnerability, from honesty, from being willing to share your pain so others don't feel alone in theirs.